Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Tatum, zip to the Jaylen Brown, right side, three in the air, good night.
You two big fellas coming and going to work.
If the right hand doesn't get you, the left hand will. Celtics by 11 after trailing by 11 earlier in this quarter.
Backing down one kid at the left block, going to work, spinning, fades away, and scores. Kyle Filipowski has 14, and Duke has their biggest lead of the night, 71-59 at 12.
Cryer trying to go to work, free throw line, step back jumper, short, no. Rebound Tugler. Tugler kicks it back to Cryer, and now to Shed. Left wing Cryer. Cryer inside Roberts. Roberts leans in. Left hand off the glass for two. 72-70. 37.2 to go.
Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. I'm Ravi, Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. We're also live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. What's going on, man?
Hey. You're very bright this morning.
I know,
I feel like you should be directing traffic.
It's very yellow. We're doing some.
Well, that's an airplane, so I guess we're doing.
We're doing some air traffic, or we're doing the tarmac.
I guess maybe you could be doing that if you were like, outside of a school, and you're like, all right, you guys,
You go. Come on.
hold on, stop. The walkers. Were you ever a walker in school?
Not really, no.
I never lived close enough to be a walker, but I was always jealous of the walkers because they always got out of school earlier than everybody else.
Yeah, I was not really. I mean, I could count like a handful of times ever that I was a walker home from school, and I did live close enough. My parents were just like, "No, we'll just come pick you up. Whatever, it's fine."
Then again, when it was cold outside, I did not envy the walkers.
You did not want to be a walker when it was cold outside. Like a couple weeks ago here in Omaha, you did not.
Yeah, no thanks. Although
here
here in Omaha, everybody had snow days
That's
or
true.
work from home days or whatever they call them now.
remote learning days.
E-learning days.
Terrible.
Yeah, whatever those are.
COVID killed the snow day. How dare you?
Yeah, and it's still so funny to
It's
me.
a bummer. I mean, I don't care. I'm not a child. I don't have kids. Doesn't matter to me.
I always work.
But yeah, it's like, I mean, literally the only day we didn't come into the studio, we still worked, and we just made Sasha drive here and risk life and limb.
We didn't make Sasha do anything. Let's get that straight. Sasha was an animal and chose to drive in to get the show on the air for everybody at home.
Far tougher than all of us combined. Like, that's not even a question.
But yeah, she still plays hockey.
Yeah, it's nuts to me. Right there. It's absurd. I can't even skate.
Yeah, I've never put on skates before. I bet I'd look like Bambi.
That actually kind of surprises me for how much you like hockey. I'm surprised you never ice skated.
So growing up, my brother could roller skate. Is roller skate or roller blade? I think it's roller blade, right? The blades are the four in a row.
Yeah, the blades are the ones that look like ice skates.
Right. My brother could roller blade very well.
Mm-hmm.
Me, not so much. Like I can hardly stand on both of my feet without going down. At any moment in time, I could be going to a knee.
Just
with
normal
these baby bird
walking.
ankles. So I would always play hockey, like street hockey, just in tennis shoes, because as much as I thought it was cool that he could rollerblade, I never trusted myself to not fall down. And if you know anything about pavement or concrete, it hurts when you fall on it.
It does, yeah.
So people are probably like, well, yeah, you have to get over that fear in order to get good at it. Guess what? I didn't even want to tackle that fear.
He didn't. That's like, it's like me in the ocean. I'm like, no, I'm good.
So, and we would go to roller rinks for birthday parties and things. And I would put on skates. Dude, I'd take 5 strides and then you would see me sliding into second base. And that's just how it was. I'd do 4 laps and I guarantee I was on the rink floor for at least 3 of those 4 laps. If you tallied it up, if I made 4 circles, 3 full circles, I would be on the floor.
That's not great. That's not what you want to see.
So I chose not to even ice skate because I couldn't roller skate. And why would I be able to ice skate if I could roller skate?
That's true. That's true.
One is much harder than the other.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, the rollerblading is not the hard one.
I have only ice skated once in my life. It went terribly. I was so bad at it. It was one of the most exhausting things I've ever done in my life, because when you're trying to stay upright on ice skates, it is physically exhausting.
And people are like, oh, push off the heels. Yeah, easier said than done.
I was like, I don't even know what that means. I don't even know what that means. I was terrible at it. It's been almost 20 years since I've done it. And I don't really have any desire to do it again. It was not a good experience.
Yeah, I'll try it at least once. I really will. Ashley's been trying to get me to go.
Yeah.
And like, there will come a day where I am presented with the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Like, so when I was in New York, like 3 years ago, we were at Rockefeller Center. They had the ice rink.
See, that's the place to do it.
That would have been the place to do it. But to rent ice skates, it was, more expensive than it would be to do it here in Omaha.
Yeah.
But two, the line was so long and I didn't feel like waiting. If it was like to water ski, like I love lake sports, water skiing, wakeboarding, things like that. And I'm good at that. Like I would wait in line to do that activity. Mm-hmm. But if it's something that I know I would struggle with, I'm like, why would I wait 45 minutes to get a pair of skates just for like people to get off? Because, there's a capacity on ice rinks.
Sure.
Like you can't just have like anybody and everybody on there. Then there wouldn't be anywhere to skate. So I would sit there and, wait for somebody to get off and then I could get on. It just didn't sound fun to me. So I just kept on walking and I went to a rooftop bar instead.
I do like a rooftop bar. It's funny that we're kind of talking about stuff that I didn't intend to talk about ice skating this morning.
I did. I woke up and said, we're talking ice skating today.
It's funny that we're talking.
Christy Yamaguchi, isn't that a famous ice skater?
Yes, it is. Michelle Kwan, I believe, as well. I have been thinking a lot about true freshman quarterbacks, obviously, for obvious reasons, right? And I've kind of been holding this in my back pocket for a rainy day. And it's not actually raining outside, but in radio, a rainy day is when nothing's going on. And Nebraska doesn't play until Thursday in basketball. Creighton doesn't play till Friday. There's really we're kind of in a dead period for Nebraska in terms of recruiting and transfer portal. Their class is pretty much done, until spring starts, and maybe we'll get some other stuff after spring football. So I've been thinking a lot about true freshman quarterbacks for obvious reasons with Dylan Raiola. And I had this conversation. I have to give a shout out to Riley on Twitter here. Terrific dude. I've actually met him in person a couple times.
What's that?
And he put together, I have to give him credit here because I didn't do this research.
Yeah, this is a ton.
He put together this spreadsheet. And I've been saving it for a rainy day, and today is that rainy day. It is a breakdown of the top 3 true freshman quarterbacks from each class for the last decade. So going back all the way to 2013. And here's the reason that I wanted to bring this up is obviously we all think Dylan Raiola is the day one starter for Nebraska next year. And I think that's accurate. There is no one on that roster I would prefer to have starting over Dylan Raiola. And it would be difficult to bring someone in at this point that I would prefer to start. And I think we all have a certain level of expectation for him. But I was trying to figure out if these expectations are realistic or not. Because we haven't really had, first of all, Nebraska's never had this experience with this level of quarterback before. We haven't had this experience with any quarterback since Adrian Martinez as a true freshman. You go back to like Taylor Martinez was a redshirt. I believe Tommy Armstrong was a redshirt. Those were both freshmen starting quarterbacks, but that redshirt year makes a huge difference. These are true freshman quarterbacks. And so I wanted to start here. I wanted to start with our individual expectations of Dylan Raiola before we got into what the actual stats are for guys of his caliber coming into their true freshman year. So I'll ask you this, and I've got numbers in mind. I don't know if that's how you did it or not. I've got sort of like benchmarks in my head of what I think is a reasonable expectation for Dylan Raiola. So I can go first if you want me to.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because I didn't look at it from a numbers perspective. Okay. I looked at it more as what did I see on the football field last year and what can I
Nebraska?
expect to see this year for Nebraska?
Okay, so let's start there because I think starting in a more philosophical place might be useful. And then I do have hard numbers in my head. And again, it's not like, oh, if he is 10 yards under this amount, then he was a failure.
It's
just
a bust, man.
It's just
a bust.
Hey, if you
wanted 3,000 and he got 2,990, he's a bust.
Terrible. These are kind of just like general neighborhoods that I think are reasonable to expect out of him. So you have a more philosophical approach. Let's start there.
So just for starters, Dylan Raiola is presented with kind of like the greatest yet toughest task.
Very challenging. It's a challenging opportunity.
And it's to awaken the sleeping giant known as Nebraska. Because Nebraska has had so much success over the years, and it's been asleep for way too long. So he's got the opportunity to awake this sleeping giant. The Huskers currently have the longest bowl drought in FBS. Haven't posted a top 5 finish in the AP poll since after the 2001 season. But like when you look at the problems of last season, and then you look at what they have this season, we'll go to last season first. Where Nebraska had their issues, we always fall back on the quarterback. That quarterback spot is where the number one issue rolled in.
And that the fewest bright spots.
Yeah, that problem was on full display last year. Yeah. And even prior to that, Nebraska hasn't been consistently dominant at that position since when you mention names like Taylor Martinez, Tommy Frazier back in the 90s, Tommy Armstrong. These are guys that especially like the 90s quarterbacks were insane for that time. But when you got to Taylor Martinez and Tommy Armstrong, it's like, okay, who else was in that mix of guys that were really looked at as outstanding for the program?
Probably the brightest the quarterback position has felt. There's 2 instances in my head. Between Adrian Martinez's freshman and sophomore year, there was a ton of hype around him. He was very good as a true freshman, for a true freshman. And so that offseason, I think he was 3rd in Heisman favorites in the offseason, which is nuts to think about in retrospect. I mean, he was a nice player.
But in terms of team success, it still wasn't there.
Yes. So that was a bright spot in terms of quarterback position. And then the first few games, I want to say it was through game 5 or 6 of of Taylor Martinez's redshirt freshman season. There was a Thursday night game at Kansas State where he just took the nation by storm, and he was a Heisman hopeful after that game. And it sort of seemed like, oh my gosh, do we have one of those guys?
So, and I love how you're building this up for me, because he will have the biggest impact of any college freshman this season.
Oh, yeah.
Of any across the board, Dylan Raiola will have the biggest impact.
For better or worse. I mean, one way or another.
Yeah. Nebraska low-key was a quarterback away last year from being a scary team in the Big Ten West. There was even a point in time where we were talking about them winning the Big Ten West.
At 5-3, you're sitting there and you're like, this isn't impossible, and it's not even crazy.
Cue Tony White and one of the best defenses in college football next year, and you might just have something now that you have Dylan Raiola in. That's why I think this stage is so great for him, because team success could be instantaneous if Dylan Raiola is as productive as some of the true freshmen on this sheet.
Well, and as we hope he is, right? And that's a really good point. So there's another part of this that I want to tackle also, because it is worth noting that, and we're going to go through some of these freshmen after I give my expectations for Dylan Raiola, but there's a big difference between most of the guys on this list and Dylan Raiola, and that's where they chose to go to school. Because most of these guys, let's use Caleb Williams for an example, okay? Most of these guys are going into a situation where
they're not the number one guy.
Well, there's already another 5-star.
Right.
Like Caleb Williams walked into a situation. I know Spencer Rattler is kind of a punchline now, right?
But he still was a
5-star
quarterback.
He was the top ranked, literally, 2 years before Caleb Williams, he was the top ranked quarterback in the country going to Oklahoma. Like, there was a Netflix docuseries that featured him very prominent. Like, he was the dude. So Caleb Williams, the fact that he played at all is kind of shocking considering that situation, but that probably has more to do with Spencer Rattler than it does Caleb Williams, or as much to do with Spencer Rattler. But that's an example. Like, there's a lot of these dudes that walked into situations where there was already a dude there, right? Arch Manning goes into a situation. Quinn Ewers was a 5-star top-ranked recruit in the class 2 years before him, right? There is a lot of these situations. Cade Klubnik was a 5-star in the class 2 years after DJ Uiagalelei was a 5-star in the class, right?
I mean, those Clemson quarterbacks, you can look down on.
I was saying, and you go 2 years before that, and you got Trevor Lawrence 2 years before that. You go 2 years before that, you've got Deshaun Watson. So, like, this is a very unique situation. So when we
how many guys on this list really are we looking at and saying they had the number one job when they came in as a true freshman?
So there's a guy that I'm looking at, and we'll get to him, that I think is probably the closest to what Nebraska's dealing with right now.
Is he at the top of the list?
No.
Okay.
He's not. He's
because the guy I'm looking at is Dante Moore.
Yeah, so that's not the one I'm looking at. There's a guy that I think is in a very similar position to what Dylan Raiola was or is at Nebraska, and he's a few years back. We'll get to him. First, I wanted to get to kind of some context here on hard numbers, okay? So Adrian Martinez, the most successful true freshman quarterback Nebraska's had since Tommy Frazier, okay? And I think the only one that started the season as the starting quarterback. As a true freshman, which ended up, by the way, being his best year at Nebraska. As a true freshman, he completed 64.5% of his passes, 2,600 yards, 17 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Let's go to rushing stats.
I think that's pretty on par to what you see from a lot of true freshmen that get the amount of or that have the amount of games played as Taylor Martinez had.
He also had 600 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns.
So I love playing away games.
You're talking about 3,200 yards of total offense, 25 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. 25 total touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Now he had ironically, as a freshman, I don't see fumbles on here, but I'm pretty sure there was a couple fumbles in there as well. Although I think that was a bigger problem as he got later in his career. 25 total touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 3,200 yards of total offense.
Yeah, the rushing numbers are a little bit different than guys that we're looking at on this sheet.
So, but that was a big part of Nebraska's offense.
Part of his game.
That was a huge part of Adrian Martinez's game. That's part of the why. So,
we talking Adrian or Taylor?
Adrian.
Okay.
Adrian. So because Taylor was a redshirt freshman, so I didn't want to count him.
Okay.
Adrian was the true freshman. So it does get very confusing. There were a lot of Martinez quarterbacks in a row there.
They're so close at times. So when you look at 2 of the 3 top quarterbacks over the last, let's just call it
12
15 years.
Yeah. It's a little
having both of them be Martinez. You know what? It's hard to wrap your brain around.
And they
sometimes.
each played for 4 years in Nebraska, so it's like that's a huge chunk of Nebraska's recent quarterback history. So I
got chills throughout my body.
Thank you, Taylor. That's context for all the good drops are Taylor, not Adrian.
I'm just kidding.
So
I'm glad we won.
He likes playing against road games too. So that's some
Nebraska
context.
Basketball doesn't.
No, they certainly don't. That's some context as to what Adrian, who was a good true freshman starting quarterback. With that in mind, here's kind of the numbers that I have in mind for Dylan Raiola. If I think he's going to be, if you think he's going to be successful here at Nebraska, I think anything above like 62% completion percentage, you'd be happy with. Okay. Especially coming off of last year.
As long as he's throwing more than like 16 balls.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming he's throwing like 25 times a game minimum, like 25 to 30 times a game. So 62% completion percentage is kind of the number I've got in my head. Is he capable of better than that? Probably, but I also expect him, unlike Adrian was able to do, to progress throughout his career and not kind of regress. So 62% completion percentage. I think because of the nature of the offense and because he probably won't be running as much as a quarterback the way Adrian was, I do think the passing yardage is going to be a little bit higher. If you're playing 12 games, how many yards per game do you have to get to to get to 3,000? Do some quick maths here.
Well, if you play 12 games and you want 2,400, that's 200 yards a game.
Yeah.
So it would be like 250 yards a game.
It's 250, which I don't think is a crazy number. I do think it's probably a touch high.
Mm-hmm.
So I landed around 2,800.
I think that'd be really, really good.
That'd be a good number, right? Again, these are kind of what I think are reasonable expectations, but on the good end, like if he's having a successful year. Touchdown to interception ratio is where it gets a little tricky, right? Then those are the last two numbers I kind of came up with in my head because those are sort of your main benchmarks, right? Completion percentage, yards, touchdowns, interceptions. I think he can get to like low 20s for touchdowns. I think that's reasonable. I had like somewhere between like 21 and 23 in my head. I wouldn't be shocked if the interceptions are a little bit higher because as a true freshman, you tend to make some mistakes. You're adjusting to the speed of the game.
Yeah, but I wouldn't expect it to be double digits.
I think it's going to be right on the cusp. I'm in that kind of like somewhere between 9 and 11 range, like kind of right in that neighborhood, I think is a reasonable number for Dylan Raiola. So with that in mind, so what did we say? 62%, about 2,800 yards. We'll call it 22 touchdowns, and we'll call it 10 interceptions to pick the number right in the middle there, right? If I handed you a slip of paper and said,
this is what you're getting,
you sign this and you get exactly that, are you in or are you out?
You know I'm an exact person. Like this question was brought up. I think it was last year when we were talking about like, would you sacrifice a bad like Nebraska season if it guaranteed you like 8 wins over the next 2 seasons? And I'm like, yeah, I will sign that document today. So yes, I will sign that document that you're handing me because if you can give me guarantees, I'm a guarantee guy. It's like when you're traveling. If you're flying on Southwest, you know you have to check in 24 hours before the flight. But guess what? You're gambling.
Yeah.
You could either get A or you could get C. But hey, if you do early bird check-in and they check in for you, you're guaranteed that A spot.
I'm going to prepay. I'm prepaying for the A spot.
Give me the guarantee.
So okay. So let's say that's what it is. Say it's 62%, 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Assuming a similar Nebraska defense from last year. Maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse. I tend to think it'll actually be a little bit better because you've got young guys that'll be maturing. I think your pieces are in the system for another year. They'll have a better grasp on things.
It's crazy what confidence can do for
and comfortability, right?
Any team.
I mean, you're not learning a new system. That's a huge plus. If you're getting a similar Nebraska defense, what do those numbers get you in terms of wins?
Win total?
If you're Nebraska.
You're getting to a bowl game.
Oh, for sure.
You're getting to a bowl game for one.
Yes, absolutely.
Number two, depending on like, because you could get a lot of boom games and you could get more of a bus game in there.
Let's assume it's fairly even.
You'll see this team winning. You'll see this team winning, 8 games.
8 games? I've got a number in mind. We'll hold that thought, though.
You're going higher?
We've got to. Well, listen, I mean,
you know it. Everybody out there knows it. Ravi's about to go higher.
I've also got some numbers as comparisons to.
I was struggling to get above 7.
Oh, man. We'll come back. I've got some thoughts on that here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. It's radio. We will be back.
I mean, no turnovers. You know, they played it hot. They definitely would have.
We will be back.
We definitely would have had a shot. We definitely would have came out with a win, but they did a great job not turning the ball over. A shot. We definitely would have came out with a win, but they did a great job not turning the ball over and throwing points on the board.
It just felt really good about us converting and getting our momentum and not letting them play long ball. You know, they were bleeding the clock out. That's what they do. And I wanted to get the upper hand back, you know, and it's easy hindsight, and I get it, you know. I get that.
You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. The YouTube comments are popping off. We're going to get to some of you guys and some of your comments here in a minute. First, I do want to set up the show. Coming up at 8 o'clock, we'll talk to former Husker and Husker football analyst Damon Benning. Here at 8 a.m. At 9, we will talk to our friend Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. And then at 9:45, I've been wanting to talk to a guy from Alabama to kind of get a feel for how things are going early on in the Kalen DeBoer era. I'm glad we've actually got a radio guy for this because I'm curious how the hire has gone over, how some of the departures have gone over, and I'm curious if DeBoer is the guy they wanted. Because he's not a Southern guy. A lot of times in the SEC, you kind of want one of your guys. And so I'm curious. We've got Ryan Fowler from 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa. He hosts the game. It's an afternoon show in Tuscaloosa. I'm curious what his thoughts are on that. So we're talking to Ryan Fowler at 9:45 to wrap up the show. Because that's a storyline that I'm paying a lot of attention to in Alabama because
You love Kalen DeBoer?
A, I love Kalen DeBoer. B, I hate Alabama. C, following a legend is always fascinating to me because it's such a difficult position
the big one
to be in. And I'm just really curious about, because, I mean, for me, outside looking in, any program in the country should be thrilled to have Kalen DeBoer. But I also know the way some SEC fans think sometimes. So I'm really curious how it's gone so far early on there in Tuscaloosa. So we'll talk to Ryan Fowler at 9:45. But want to reset what we were talking about in the first segment there. We're talking about expectations versus reality for Dylan Raiola as his true freshman year at Nebraska. I said rough numbers that I think would be a good year for him, but I think are attainable. 62% completion percentage, 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. On the YouTube channel, a couple people have chimed in. Drunk Monk chimed in. He said, okay, if he basically is successful, puts up those numbers, how long do we have Dylan Raiola? I think 3 years. Like if Dylan Raiola is at Nebraska for 3 years, I think things have worked out perfectly, right? Because A, that means he didn't transfer out, most likely. B, if he's leaving after as soon as he can, eligibility-wise, to go to the NFL, that means he's been really good because he's going to go to the NFL. And C, if he's really good, that means Nebraska's likely winning.
Yeah, and that's the big one for me, because if Nebraska is winning, he's not going to transfer out, for one. And two, I actually see him here for all 4 years because of NIL, because of how much money he can actually make staying here versus going to the draft. And yes, if he's a top pick, if he's like a top 3 pick, well, you know what? I think we'll cut our losses knowing that we had a top 3 pick quarterback in the NFL draft. But altogether, you're looking at somebody that even if he was exploring options after his biggest season, say junior year, Nebraska just won, we'll call it 10 games. They made it to the college football expanded playoff. Even if a team, say, top 5 in the country, we'll say Bama needs a quarterback with Kalen DeBoer. Don't think Nebraska can't offer exactly what Bama would offer Dylan Raiola to stay.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about the transfer aspect.
So the money there is not a non-issue, because Nebraska has enough to keep their top player. If he's performing to the ability that everybody hopes he will, and everybody thinks he will, then he'll be here for a solid 4 years. I would put him his full time here unless he's a day 1 pick at the NFL draft.
Yeah, and that's kind of, if things are going well, like if this is his true freshman season and he continues to grow from here and he hits those numbers I'm talking about, I do think you're talking about a first-round draft pick. And his pedigree, his recruiting ranking would indicate that is a justified career projection for him if things are working out. So that was Husker Chuck that asked how many years is he here.
But again, if they're competing for the college football playoff and say they got a taste of it his junior season, that could be all somebody needs to stick around. Try it one more time.
Yeah, it certainly could be. So that's some of the comments on the YouTube stream. We appreciate you guys chiming in. There's also a whole discussion about the Taylor Martinez K-State game going on in there that I really enjoy, because it was a very, like, looking back at it, it was a really indelible moment in terms of watching Husker football. But in retrospect, knowing how Taylor Martinez's career has played out, knowing how Husker football has been since then, it's a very strange moment in time, because I think Nebraska was like either right before or right after that game, they were like a top 10 team in the country, and Taylor Martinez was a Heisman hopeful, and Nebraska was the talk of college football. And you're just like, what's happening, right? Like, it's, in retrospect, it's a very strange moment in time. And it was an incredible moment in Taylor Martinez's career. Unfortunately, the high point of Taylor Martinez's career. But you said before the break, if Dylan Raiola hits my numbers, 62%, 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, that's good for 8 wins if you're Nebraska. The number I had in my mind was 9. I think if he hits those numbers, and we said assuming a similar defense to what we saw this year, because I don't think they were that far off from 8 wins this year. Look at some of the games that they lost, right? You look at Minnesota. If they've got functional quarterback play against Minnesota, that's a win. You look at Iowa and Wisconsin. and Maryland, if they've got functional quarterback play in any of those games, those are wins. So that's 4 right there. And I'm not even asking you to win all 4 of them. I'm just asking you to win 3 of those 4. And all of a sudden, you're at those 8. Michigan State's another great example. That would be, I'm not saying they were going to win 10 games last year with functional quarterback play, but those are 5 extra games that could have gone either way with functional quarterback play. You get 3 of those, boom, you're at 8. That's not 3-2 in those games is a reasonable outcome. I'm not asking you to go 5-0. So I think they could have got 8 last year with reasonable, competent quarterback play, and they didn't get it. This year, not only do you have Dylan Raiola, not only do you have hopefully a better receiver room with the young guys being a year older, you brought in a couple transfers. Hopefully you've got a healthier running back room, Andrew Brian Dowdell from Oregon. I think the offensive line is going to continue to grow. I thought Raiola did a great job last year. That's Donnie, not Dylan. We're gonna have to be real specific with our Raiolas.
It's the Martinezes, it's the Raiolas, it's everybody.
We're gonna be real specific with first names. We're just gonna call him Donnie from now on. But
Donnie,
I thought he did a really good job with the offensive line last year. I think they were really excited about some of these young guys, especially a guy like Sam Sledge. Not to mention Mazuka, who's coming in as a day 1 starter at guard. I think the offensive line's even better this year, and I thought they were pretty good last year. I think the defensive line with all those young guys that played with Princewell and Lenhart are going to be even better. And I mentioned you're in a system for another year, you're even better. I think 9 wins, if Dylan Raiola hits those numbers, I think 9 wins is incredibly reasonable.
Yeah, remember, though, we're not playing last year's schedule.
I know.
Nebraska has a much tougher final stretch to this season than they did last season.
The last 4 or the last 5 games in 2024 are certainly much more difficult. But the first 7,
yeah, you could get 6 wins there.
Pretty damn negotiable.
You could start 6-1, but then again, now you're expecting to win 3 of the next 5, and those 3 of the next 5 you're taking on. And I'm gonna try to just pop this off the top of my head.
I've got it right here. It's Ohio State, UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa. Now, at Iowa is always tough. That's going to be a coin flip game. Wisconsin, always a coin flip game. All right. Let's say best case scenario, you split those, okay?
So USC's in the same boat as Nebraska, but Nebraska has the better defense.
Nebraska got the better, and USC's defense has been horrible.
Right.
They're losing Caleb Williams. I know everybody looks at that game and they're like, oh, that's a loss. I'm not chalking it up as a loss.
No, but I look at it as very similar to the situation Nebraska's in, because you have another 5-star stepping up and they have a really good offense, but they don't have the defense. And that's why I actually would give Nebraska the edge in that game. Against Ohio State, don't have as much of a reason to believe that one's going to go Nebraska's way. And then UCLA, I would consider a toss-up game.
Again,
so now you're looking at 3 toss-up games, maybe 1 win and 1 L, if we want to call it that. There's ability to get to 9. I just want everyone out there to remember.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for things to go right. It's so hard for things to go right at Nebraska. And if it were to get to 9, I mean, shoot.
Listen,
Shane's going to take off his shirt and run across the parking lot.
Andrew, we are due.
In negative weather, right, Shane?
We are due for things to go right.
He's nodding his head over there.
We are due for things to go right. Okay, coming up, I want to give you some context of what other true freshman quarterbacks have done to see if I'm out of my mind here. And we'll
try to compare who Dylan Raiola could be.
Exactly. That's next on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and we are brought to you by our friends at the Omaha Supernovas. If you were out at CHI Health Center on Wednesday last week, you know how electric things were for their opening match of the Pro Volleyball Federation. That was a Wednesday night, okay? This upcoming match on Saturday, I have to imagine it's on a weekend. People don't have to be at work the next day. I have to imagine it's going to be even better, and that's what I'm calling for you all to come through for me, is to make an even better atmosphere for the Omaha Supernovas on Saturday, February 3rd. The Supernovas take on the San Diego Mojo at CHI Health Center. You can get tickets at supernovas.com. That is a 6 p.m. start, right? So you can get run your errands and stuff on Saturday. Still plenty of time to get to the CHI Health Center for San Diego at your Omaha Supernovas. Tons of talent on the court. You saw it on Wednesday against the Atlanta Vibe. You'll see it again on Saturday against the San Diego Mojo. Your Omaha Supernovas, you've got NCAA champions, Olympians, you've got All-Americans out there. This is a great collection of volleyball talent. Join the volleyball movement sweeping the country by supporting your Omaha Supernovas. Go to supernovas.com for tickets, schedule, anything you need to know. That's supernovas.com. All right, so recapping here. You're saying 8 wins if Dylan Raiola hits my benchmarks of 62%, 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions.
Which I think those benchmarks are solid.
Listen,
I think they're very solid.
It's assuming that he is successful, but that's not asking him to be a Heisman contender in year 1 as a true freshman or anything like that. That is within the.
So I shouldn't place that bet?
I mean, listen, it depends on what the odds are.
But Warhorse is telling me yes. My mind is telling me no.
But the odds are telling me yes. It is all of, listen, futures bets are all about the odds, right?
That they are.
So I'm not asking them to do anything crazy. I am assuming a certain level of success. With that level of success, you said 8 wins. I said 9 wins. But my guy Riley on Twitter put together this incredible spreadsheet of every true freshman in the top 3 in terms of recruiting for the last 10 years and what they've done in their true freshman season. Now, there is a large variance in what these guys are. And again, it's important to remember situationally what they were walking into. A lot of these guys, as we talked about in segment number 1, were walking into situations where you had 5 stars already entrenched as your starter. They're walking into situations where these teams were competing for national championships in their true freshman season. That is not the situation at Nebraska. You are walking into a situation as Dylan Raiola that you are by far the best quarterback on the roster currently. No offense to Heinrich Harburg and Danny Kaelin and all the walk-ons. There's no question who the best guy in the room is right now. That is unusual for a quarterback of his caliber. There is a guy that I think has a bit of similarity in terms of his situation walking into a room like that. And that guy got to 9 wins the way I think Nebraska will if Dylan Raiola has those numbers. And listen, people may push back on this name in terms of how his career continued to go at this school, but he ended up transferring and was incredible last year.
Okay.
That name is Bo Nix at Auburn.
He has a little more mobility than Dylan Raiola.
Yes. I'm not talking about style of play necessarily. I'm talking about situations they were coming into when they were brought in. If I remember 2019 Auburn correctly, it's not like they had they didn't have a loaded room going into that season.
And he was the poster child.
He was day 1 starter. Okay. Here's the numbers that
legacy.
A legacy kid, much like obviously Dylan Raiola is. Here are the numbers that he put up in 12 games as a starter. Okay. 2,300 yards. Okay. So a little lower than mine. 57% completion percentage, a little lower than mine. 15 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. Now, that translated to 9 wins for Auburn that year. So in 2019, maybe Auburn was a little more talented than Nebraska is in 2024. Maybe not. I don't totally know that I assume that's true. It's not like Auburn's not Alabama, right? I don't assume just because they had 9 wins in the SEC that they were more talented than Nebraska is next year. I do think situationally it's very similar to what Dylan Raiola is walking into.
That's a good comp.
Now, numbers-wise, there's other guys that I think are more similar in terms of what I'm expecting. But situationally, I think that's pretty similar. You've got an Auburn team that, okay, you take Auburn fans out of it. 2019 Auburn, probably not competing for a national title. That's not a hot take. That's just where they were at. True freshman quarterback, was day 1 starter, legacy kid at the school, and was by far walking into a place where, there were no other 5 stars in the room, right? I think Bo Nix is a decent comp situationally for what Dylan Raiola was walking into. Who did you think I was going to say?
Well, initially,
because you said Dante Moore early.
Dante Moore was the one I said to start off, because if you just kind of look at the situation that I was paying closer attention to was true freshman starting right away recently. And so just going on that list, Dante Moore is, the number 1 option to kind of compare that to. But your Bo Nix grab's a good one because, outside of the statistical look, everything else that kind of comes with the situation is the one that Dylan Raiola is walking into. And then down the list, and this situation may not be exact, but I think if you could put numbers together like Christian Hackenberg did at Penn State,
that's the one that numbers wise I think is closest.
That I think is a perfect match for what Dylan Raiola could show in year one. So I don't love the interception total because it does hit that double-digit mark. But if you can keep that at around 8 in year one, I think people are going to be cool with 20 to 25 touchdowns. Now, Hackenberg ended with 20, but he had close to 3,000 yards. His completion percentage was a little bit lower, but you're also, I'm remembering here that, look, Penn State's that team that, a Big Ten team. So like these are numbers that, are pretty close to what you can expect. And they played in, a really good side of the Big Ten.
Well, and the other thing with that is important to remember, Christian Hackenberg as a true freshman was in year 2 of Bill O'Brien, which was directly after the Joe Paterno scandal at Penn State. That team was not in a great spot. They still ended up going 7-5, which was kind of a miracle because of what the roster looked like and all the sanctions that were levied against them by the NCAA. But 29.55 for yardage, 59% completion percentage, 20 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Very close to the numbers we talked about. There's another guy who is very close to the numbers that we talked about as well, and that's Josh Rosen. He's a little higher on yardage, but he's right at 59.
Threw the ball a ton.
Yeah,
in year
threw
one.
the ball a ton. Probably more than Dylan Raiola will, or at least I'm
threw the ball 450 times. That's pretty nuts.
Airing it out, but right under 60%, 3,300 yards, 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, kind of right in that range there. Another guy that started day one, Jacob Eason at Georgia in 2016, 2,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, only 55% completion. I think those numbers for Dylan Raiola would be disappointing. I would be disappointed in those numbers.
You could also live with the low touchdown total if it means you're getting that made up for it in the running back.
Yeah, like let's say Dante Dowdell has 12 rushing touchdowns
and Dylan Raiola throws for 15. I think you're cool with that.
Then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. And Dowdell, let's say he goes for 1,100 yards. You're like, okay, I can live with a little bit more balance here. But if you look at those numbers, 55% completion, 2,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, I would actually be a little disappointed if that's what Dylan Raiola, that's kind of the low end of what I think would be an acceptable year for Dylan Raiola as a starting quarterback. JT Daniels at USC started most of his games as a freshman. His numbers, 2,600 yards, right at 60% completion, 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. You'd like that ratio to be a little better, but that's kind of in the neighborhood again. There's not a ton of guys that played that started day one as freshmen. What I can say about these quarterbacks, and Riley was kind enough to break out some of these numbers for me, over half of these quarterbacks, 55% of them, so there's 33 total in the list that he put together, played at least half the games, at least 6 games over the course of that season. So obviously with Dylan Raiola, we expect him to go way over that number, assuming health, knock on wood. Only 5 of those quarterbacks redshirted. Here's a really, I think, exciting number if you're Nebraska. Only 3 quarterbacks on this list threw more interceptions than touchdowns as true freshmen. Now, there were some guys that were close, like Dante Moore was 11-9. We mentioned...
and he only played 9 games.
Yeah, we mentioned Jacob Eason was like 14-8. So you had some that ratios were pretty close to 1-1, but only 3 threw more interceptions than touchdowns. And that's a win for Nebraska starting off just in that area there. But as I think we've established, there is precedent for the numbers we talked about when you're walking in as the day one starter as a true freshman. Now, a lot of guys don't walk into that situation, but for the guys that have, there's some precedent in terms of what Dylan Raiola could do. And listen, let's be honest here. We're not talking about hugely different numbers than what we laid out for Adrian Martinez as a true freshman. And Dylan Raiola obviously is more touted at the very least than Adrian Martinez was. Coming up next, we're going to talk to our guy Damon Benning, Husker football analyst and former Husker. Coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
I mean, no turnovers. You know, they played the game basically perfect. They put points on the board. I felt like if we wouldn't turn the ball over, we definitely would have had a shot. We definitely would have came out with a win, but they did a great job not turning the ball over and putting points on the board.
I just felt really good about us converting and getting our momentum and not letting them play long ball. They were bleeding the clock out. That's what they do. And I wanted to get the upper hand back. And it's easy hindsight, and I get it, I get that.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. You can catch us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. Joining us now on the the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is our friend Damon Benning, former Husker and Husker football analyst. DB, what's going on, buddy?
Oh, nothing. I'm just leaving the school. I was sitting in the parking lot catching up on a couple of articles. I was reading Tom Chattel's piece on Sunday because I had to go back and pit it against the AAU numbers that I was reading, not basketball, academics, in the article yesterday. So, hey.
Well, I would have thought basketball, so I'm actually as soon as you said AAU, I was like,
when you spend your time chasing kids around like all summer, it's definitely ingrained. But with this time of year, man, it's like I always go back to what we talked about. I think I've talked about this since Trev's been there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a unified front, right? Where your president then, and now your interim president now, as he's starting to make his interview rounds, Trev Alberts, Matt Rule, even like John Cook, like guys and gals on the same page, pulling in the same direction for the same thing. It's crazy. Right? We talked last year about, remember this, like conference expansion and power conferences. And Trev had an interview on the Husker Radio Network where he talked about the potential for power conferences and aligning themselves for the future. And people kind of rolled their eyes, right? Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I could see the power conferences, but like, where are we? Like, what do you mean? And I'm just telling you, when you look at Trev's demeanor, remember how we talked about building the athletic department in a place where you kind of want more, and you're rebranding, and you're trying new things. Like, he's just like his head football coach. I told you guys, I can't remember if it was Drew Down or you, Ravi, when I said, Coach Rule, when he first got here, he said the number one thing that he wanted to guard against was having his staff think this was Disneyland, because it was the best job that a lot of those guys have had, and they will coach against complacency. You remember that?
Yeah.
Who runs their athletic department like that? I mean, they're like one in the same. They never settle. They're constantly tinkering, and now it seems like they're trying to position themselves for like this long haul future run to be in a good spot for these power conferences. I think this thing is fascinating, and they've been giving us bird crumbs, I'm telling you, for like 2 years. 2 years.
DB, we talk about kind of the importance of an organization being on the same page a lot with professional franchises, right? We talk about the importance of a good owner and a good GM and a good head coach and everybody being on the same page. We don't talk about it as much with universities and college programs, with the president and the AD and your head coach, whether it be football, basketball, whoever, on being on the same page. But are those two things way more similar than we realize?
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's easy to kind of see with the athletic department and the head coach, right? Look no further than, like, let's say Iowa, who's been really consistent and really good for a long time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's been consistency. I apologize for the dinging. Is that in my head, or can you guys really hear that?
No, we heard that. We heard it.
Oh, I was kind of serious. I was like, is that out loud?
Those are called auditory hallucinations, DB.
Hey, you never know, man. It's like it's the Aurora Borealis or something. I don't know what's going on with the weather.
That's a different thing.
Hey, lay on your horn right now. See if we can hear it.
Let me get back to Iowa and consistency. Right? It's so the athletic director Kirk Ferentz. When Barta left, it was okay. It's a huge role to fill. You've got to be able to get along. And is the new pres or is the president on the same page as kind of the vision that the football team is casting and what's going on with my major sports? Like we rolled our eyes, right? What was going on with Michigan's president and athletic directors, then athletic directors, and a head football coach, like during COVID? Go to Minnesota with a president, an athletic director, and a head coach. Only one of those schools, well, one kind of Iowa, because Barta stepped down, but they did get a great athletic director. None of those schools kept all three of those things in place through that transition of growth. And only one of those schools seemed to get somebody that had a similar vision to keep things going, and that was Iowa. Now, we'll see what happens and how it plays out with Michigan, because Harbaugh is no longer there, even though Manuel did end up getting that job. So I think having that triumvirate in place is huge, right? When Greg Byrne got hired at Alabama, one of the things we've got a pretty good relationship, just because obviously his mom taught me at Lincoln, and his dad was my athletic director. And one of the things that he wanted to do before he took a job at Bama, you think, oh, let's just go to Bama, man, great place to be. Not so much. He was doing big things at Arizona. He got a new stadium. They'd moved. Baseball. I'm thinking more baseball here. Just coming off the heels of CWS appearances, and he said one of the things that he wanted to check out and make sure was how visions aligned across the board with academia, athletics, and his money-making coaches, because it all matters. Right? You don't think that like that matters at Creighton? You don't think that matters at the University of Nebraska? Like, those things are way undersold. And when you look at what's going on with we'll just go back to Nebraska with the tinkering of things, volleyball day or what's the new spring game. Like 11 o'clock. We got that memo a couple weeks ago for the broadcast. I was like, 11 o'clock? Like, why are we doing a spring game at 11 o'clock? But then I thought about it. I'm like, it's above my pay grade. So when I landed the plane, I go, oh, at least I get the day done early, right? But
half glass full.
What does everybody say at like the grocery stores or? It's like, why is it so early? The people traveling from western Nebraska, now we're going to have to spend the night. And I'm like, fine. It's like, even if you're coming from like, let's go Scottsbluff, right? 5 hours, right? You leave at 5, 4:30. We're good, right? You still get your time to tailgate. Oh, what? How many people are we going to get there for a recruit? I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like the Nebraska Day experience that Trev and Coach Rule and that admin want to do is something that they think they might be good for the long haul. Hey, how do we stack and pack momentum? Like, that's a real thing. And it's not just football. It's wrestling. It's volleyball. It's basketball. How do we stack and pack momentum? Because we want to stay current. We want to stay up to speed. We know we do some things well, but what ultimately has been the university's downfall the past 20 years? Complacency. So you do the same things you've always done. Like, you're going to get some of the same things you've always gotten. Now, when you start to remove some of those key pieces and continue with a similar mindset, you're probably going to suffer. And Nebraska suffered. So why not shake it up? Let's Oh, I hate the Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
thing.
great reference. I knew it. A great one. Perfect timing.
No, I'm so over that. It's like I almost. Oh, I don't know. I almost threw myself off my back deck.
Hey, don't have any bad blood. It's all right.
And it's only, here's the thing. Here's why I didn't do it. It's only a 3-foot drop, and I didn't want to break anything. Like if I was gonna go bad, I wanted to go all the way bad. I just didn't want like a dislocated shoulder.
Yeah, you got to be more like Creed. You got to be 6 feet from the edge. You know.
And I'm going down. It's like do something different and don't ever settle. Like we've never seen this manner of recruiting that Coach Rule's done. If it doesn't work out, he'll tinker with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, you still got 2024s coming in. Well, you know what? I think they can help us. Well, what about such and such? Oh, we'll figure it out as we go. Like when you sit idle, like time passes you by. So there's a very fine line between consistency in a process and critiquing yourself along the way to stay within the guidelines of who you are to keep growing, right? Like that's the ability to take self-inventory real time and pit it against what your values are as an organization or a singular entity. It's always a fascinating thing because the people that are really good at it, we end up admiring those folks, don't we?
Always.
It's like, and they have a unique and uncanny way of doing it. It's you maximize in the moment, but you're constantly saying, okay, I'm in the solutions business. What could I have done better? What worked? What didn't work? What's portable going forward? So, like, I got no problems with it, man. Like, let's just keeping on and see where it lands.
So much good there, DB. And I hate that you brought up Disney World at one point because then my brain went all different directions.
Did I tell that to you?
Yeah,
I think that was you, right?
Yeah, and like my brain, of course, goes a ton of different directions of like how I can use ride names to describe everything that you were saying. Like, yeah, it's no longer a Tower of Terror. They're on the test track. They're trying to make a Splash Mountain. They hit you like a Thunder Mountain Railroad. They're not up in outer space mountain. But I'm feeling like the rock and roller coaster right now.
Which
like
one's the teacups?
All of the stuff that you were just saying there, that's where my brain was. Like everything that you were talking about, I'm describing it as a different roller coaster in that theme park. But I digress. We were talking, DB, and I'm going to change gears here a little bit. We were talking the whole first hour about expectation versus reality. And in particular, Dylan Raiola. And Ravi had a good friend that put together a great spreadsheet of true freshmen over the last 10 years, the top 3 guys and how they performed statistically and where they were at situationally. So that's kind of how I want you to look at this. What are your realistic expectations for Dylan Raiola, both situationally and statistically? Because Ravi made a good comp and said Bo Nix situationally. And then we were kind of tossing around numbers and thought, man, if he could be a little Christian Hackenberg-like at Penn State, that statistically should appease Husker Nation.
Yeah, you guys don't know my history with my disdain for Christian Hackenberg.
Oh, I do.
I can't even believe you brought that up.
You're welcome.
They made more excuses for that guy in the development or lack thereof in his career at Penn State. But you talk about digressing. Holy smokes, you hit me with Christian Hackenberg. So I don't know. I like the way the question is framed. I think, like, statistically, I don't know. Like, I'd take 22, 9, and 2,900 yards.
That's almost exactly what I said. I said 2,800, 22 touchdowns, 10 picks. That's on like almost on the money.
DB knows Christian Hackenberg was 29.95 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 10 picks.
The only place I got that. Well, in my head, I just did like a rapid deal of Casey Thompson and Adrian Martinez.
Yeah.
Like that's so the 2,900 was easy, but the situationally that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the deal. Nebraska, how many games did we win last year? 5,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
5. we sat around waiting on the 6th for a whole month, and I was like, ooh, I won't have Christmas at home. And then I was like, yeah,
spoke too soon.
I'll be right here with the rest of you guys looking for a real Christmas menu. No, so, and I looked at those, you look at all those games, right? And everybody always boils it down to, well, if the quarterback would have done this, well, if the quarterback would have done that, if we, listen, Minnesota, knock a ball down, right? Like knock a ball down, catch an interception, punt the ball better. You know, Maryland, you're in cover 3. Stop chasing on a man beater, right? If it's Iowa, hey, guess what? They just ran power for the 35th time today. Fit in the run game. Don't give up a 40-yard run. Like, so the way that I look at it is, for as poor as the quarterback play was at times, it's a 3-unit deal. Special teams, defense, offense. And so I would love for quarterback play to be better. I would. But I'm big. Like, I would never say, this is how I look at it. I would never say as a special teams coach to my players, if I'm coaching, man, if that offense would just be better. Or, gosh, if that defense just would put us behind the 8 ball. So I'm not going to talk to you guys like that. As a co-coordinator, I don't care. I mean, I care what the offense does. But you know what? When we have a chance to make a play, and if we miss a tackle, or, you know, we get out leveraged on sweep, and I can say, I'm like, Bo, use your outside shoulder. Coach, it was a 3-yard gain. Don't care. Okay? A better running back may have broke that one. Let's not err on the side of what ifs. Let's just do what we can. So that's just how I am, right? Like, and so for as porous and bad as Nebraska was tackling sometimes late in games or key drives, or we couldn't play catch, or we got predictable with play calling, all of that. If you can just boil a game down to staying in the moment. Okay, it's 3rd and 6. I've got to play catch. I've got Josh Reynolds wide open. Now let's go 4th and 2. I got Josh Reynolds coming open on a little end breaker. Just play catch. Just hit him in the numbers. If I do my job as Goff and I play catch with Reynolds, I don't have to say, well, he should have made that catch, or have people really tell you that, like, that's a drop, right? Or whatever, right? So situationally with Raiola, all I think about is manage the game. When's the be honest now, for all, and this is why I'm kind of trying to land this plane, for all the hand-wringing about recruiting rankings, droppings, just manage the game. When's the last time you felt comfortable that with a drive with 3 minutes to go, a guy could complete 4 out of 6 passes, or 5 out of 5? Or if it's a 4-minute drive and you got a salt clock, that Nebraska's not going to give the ball back. Like, just manage the game. What we've seen in this last year, I'm telling you, sit on this, think about it, go home and be like, God dang, man, like, really? Of all the hand-wringing we did last year, of all those close losses, you could pick a multitude of, man, if we just would have made this field goal, if he just would have caught that pass, if he just would have lunged for that first down, if he just would have made that tackle. So when you have that many different individual things that you can do, it's not one entity's fault. So just manage the game. If I'm Raiola and he's the starting quarterback, and it's 3rd and 6, and there's 3 minutes left, and I have a 4-point lead, situationally, do you know what I don't want to do? I don't want to take a sack, and I don't want to turn the ball over. I want to know going in that, hey, kicking is not a bad thing. You're like, oh, man, it's coach speak. Hey, do you know how many times last year would you not have wanted to turn the ball over in the red zone with a chance to take the lead or with the lead? Yeah, the answer's 3, right? That's a lot.
Right.
That's unheard of. Who turns the ball over with winning or with a chance to take the lead in the red zone in the fourth quarter, right? So just manage the game. Who gives up a field goal to a walk-on kicker with 2 possessional changes in the last 30 seconds of a game? Well, Nebraska did that. But how'd they get there? Well, they couldn't get a stop on a very elementary run play where they got gashed.
Mm-hmm.
Or Merrill. Listen, the list goes on and on. Just manage the game. If a quarterback will simply manage the game, Nebraska will find themselves, especially with I can't believe I'm going to say this, with a schedule. I hate schedules.
You love schedule talk.
I don't like talk about schedules ahead of time. But you are at home, and I've said this for at least 10 years. Nebraska won't get back to any sort of prominence or national buzz until they start winning at home again. So I'm not going to talk about the opponents. I'm going to talk about starting with 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 or however many. It's 5 out of 6, I think. Where they start at home. Win the home games against equal to or lesser than perceived opponents, and you give yourself a chance. You cannot keep giving these games away and expect to ever be relevant. That's the whole thing. So when the schedule breaks like this, especially if you're going to break in a young quarterback, you can't ask for anything better than to do it in the friendly confines, because that's all you can control. Mm-hmm. You don't know what any other schools are bringing to the table in terms of talent, but you do know, because what's the excuse we made for Purdy versus Jeff Sims? Well, no, it was Harburg at the time. It wasn't even Chubba. It was, Harburg gets a much better situation. It's a non-conference game. It's at home. It's more advantageous. He didn't have to start at Minnesota. He didn't have to go on the road at Okay, so here we go. Right, you're at home. It's advantageous to play in the friendly confines. You have to make it a place where other schools stop letting other schools come in there and just win. Don't let Minnesota bring 57 guys in and win in Lincoln. When you stop doing that, we'll stop worrying a lot less about whether a guy goes 22-9 and 2,900. You know what I mean?
Just win.
You stop doing that, and you'll be amazed at how it cleans itself up.
That's Damon Benning. Good stuff there, DB, as always. There was about 10 more things I wanted to get to, but hey, next time.
Hey, never in my wildest dreams did I think we would only get to 2 questions.
I'm sorry.
Listen, all I heard was Ravi's right, 2,900, 22 touchdowns, 9 picks. That's my takeaway from
Hey, you know me in coded language. There you go.
That's DB. We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back. We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We are live and alive, which is nice. That's always good to be.
Also true.
Always nice to be alive, which, speaking of which, transition, using your seatbelt.
Thank goodness you went this one.
Saves lives and prevents injuries.
Could have went a lot of different ways there, Ravi.
If you want to be live and alive like us, make sure you're using your seatbelt. Click it, but it only works if worn properly. Make it click. This message brought to you by the NDOT Highway Safety Office. Really good stuff there from DB in the last segment. Yeah, there was like 10 more things I wanted to get to, and then we just didn't, but that's okay. That's kind of the beauty of those conversations. But
the best conversations are the ones that aren't required to
that just
fully led by question
flow.
Asking.
They just flow, right? Good stuff there. That's like a little glimpse if you ever caught me, DB, and Andrew just hanging out. Like that's kind of the feel.
I remember
there.
we were at one of our I know it's one of my favorite hole in the walls.
That's the only time I've been there, I think.
And DB showed up on a whim. I mean, I just happened to be there. He called me and said, "Hey, what's that place called?" So he shows up. I'm like, "Dude, you're not going to believe it, but I'm here right now." And he's like, "No way." So he pulls up with Jenny and Zoe, and we sit down. We're watching the Creighton game. This is last year. And then he's like, I don't know if you texted or called, but he's like, "Yeah, Ravi's going to stop by."
I called him, I think, after he had called you. And he's like, "I'm actually on my way to this place with Andrew." And I was like, "All right."
Yeah. And so Ravi shows up And this is the first time I think I met you.
Yeah, like in person. Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I ever met
This was
Ravi.
last March.
We had interactions on Twitter.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it was like, first time. And so, gosh, oddly enough, Ravi drove me home.
I gave you a ride home that day.
Because Ashley wanted to go home early. This is so funny. We're connecting dots now. But we were sitting at the table watching Creighton, and I don't think we were
Princeton, right? It was the Sweet 16 game.
It was.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I don't think we were actually watching the game enough because, we would be talking and then we'd look up and it's like, okay, 15 minutes left and say like the second half.
Yeah.
We'd talk a little bit and then we look up. It's like 7 minutes to go. Wait a second.
You're like,
where were we the last 8 minutes?
Did we just hop in a wormhole? Like what happened? And 8 basketball minutes is like 30 regular minutes, right? It's, you see the girl math on TikTok or whatever. There's nothing more boy math than time in games, right? I was telling my wife this weekend because she wanted to go get some food, and I was like, all right, I got a minute and a half. She's like, that's not a real minute and a half.
Ashley says that to me all the time.
She just stared like dead eyes at me. She goes,
she's like, I know I'm leaving in 10 minutes.
She's like, that's not a real minute and a half. And she went upstairs, like put the dogs in their room, like got everything ready to go, came back down, and there's still like 30 seconds. And she's like, you ready to go? And I was like, got like 30 seconds left. She goes, just stares at me.
But the best thing
that's
was
not a real 30 seconds.
That time was so great when you were a kid.
Oh,
because
yeah.
like say your mom's like,
you gotta go to bed.
Gotta take out the trash. And it's like, well, Mom, I'll do it at like commercial break.
Yeah.
Or I'll do it at the end of the first half. All the while knowing that it's gonna be 30 minutes before that project gets done.
Mine was always, it's time to go to bed. And I was like, Mom, just let me wait for the game to be over. There's only 8 minutes left. And I was like, I got like 40 minutes before I gotta go to bed.
Exactly.
It's time for some Hurrdat Hot Seat, though. We've got a couple guests in the 9 o'clock hour, so we're going to do that now. There's one that I want to get to that relates back to Nebraska football, and then I'll ask a stupid one that got brought up during the break. So my first one, my Nebraska football one, okay? We've been talking a lot about Dylan Raiola, expectations versus reality. I also brought up Dante Dowdell, the transfer running back from Oregon this year that they're bringing in, who is a huge get, maybe outside of Raiola, one of their most important gets in this offseason. So I'm going to ask you this question. Would you rather get, let's say, 3,000 passing yards out of Dylan Raiola? I'm not going to tell you what you get for touchdowns. I'm not going to tell you what you get for interceptions. I'm not going to tell you any of that. You get 3,000 passing yards. Or 1,200 rushing yards from Dante Dowdell.
Are we just like pushing aside Emmett Johnson?
I think Dowdell is going to be the starter.
Okay. That matters, right?
Yes.
Because if Dante Dowdell's getting 1,200 yards and Emmett Johnson's also the starting running back,
that'd be incredible.
I think we're going to be well off.
Let's say even if it's not Dowdell, let's say
you're starting running back.
One running back, one rusher for Nebraska gets 1,200 yards, which I don't think has happened since Amir Abdullah.
I'd take the rushing yards. I would take the 1,200 yards.
How high would that number have to be on passing yards before you take the passing yards?
If you told me it was 3,500 passing yards, I'd take the passing yards.
Okay, so let's say it's 3,000 still, but I drop it to 1,000 rushing yards.
12 games, 13 games, 12 games.
12 games before the bowl game,
right?
Which we're definitely making this year.
But since we're only taking regular season totals here,
that's like 80-ish yards a game, 85 yards
I'd probably take the passing yards at this point.
So like somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 is the breaking point.
Yeah, and the reason why is, I look at just the first running back that comes to mind, and I can't believe I'm bringing this name up, but Braylon Allen, okay?
Sure.
He's somebody that can either run for 140 yards or 12. And that inconsistency is not something I'm looking for.
Sure.
But were a lot of games this season that I saw Allen rush for like 60 to 80 yards, and Wisconsin football was meh. And so I'd rather lean quarterback there because I think Dylan Raiola provides a different sort of spark that this program hasn't seen in a while. And so if he can put on a show, if he can perform, even if the team isn't living up to their true ability just yet, there's still so much promise and hope and optimism
because he performed well.
Because he's performing well. So that's why I lean there if we're going lower on the rushing totals. But if we're going higher on the rushing totals, because of the variation in the game now on how you can, really run the ball down somebody's throat, but also mix in Dylan Raiola's passing game, and he still throws for maybe, let's just call it 2,700 yards.
Yeah, let's say he gets to my 2,800 number.
I'm so down with that.
If you rush for 1,200 yards, I think there's a really good chance that you won those 8 or 9 games. If you're throwing for 3,000 yards, I think it guarantees less in terms of wins. But you're right. The success of Dylan Raiola and him working out at Nebraska is almost as important in year one, at least, as the wins themselves. So that's why I think it makes it kind of a tricky question. About 2 minutes here. Do you have one?
Yeah, I'll kick this thing off, and I'm going to do one that's a little bit lighter.
Okay.
I'm going to save a heavy thinker.
Okay.
Here's a would you rather for you.
Okay.
Would you rather give up team sports altogether, but know you're good enough to play one of the individual sports to compete, or give up individual sports and erase all the memories you have of those that have played that sport just to keep team sports around?
Okay, so I'm getting rid of individual sports, but I can be on a team? Is that what?
No, so like you can watch like Creighton basketball, Nebraska football, like you're watching team sports, but you erase all memories of individual sports like Tiger Woods.
Okay.
You erase Serena Williams and, Djokovic, Nadal, people like that. Would you erase individual sports and all memories, all the people that, have really impacted those games just to keep team sports? Or would you give up team sports, but you're the one that's good enough to compete individually? And that's what you would do.
So
for
like
a living.
I'm a professional.
You're Tiger Woods.
Like I'm a professional golfer, professional tennis player, or something like that.
But you give up team sports and you can't watch football ever again. You can't.
So they exist, but I can't watch them.
No,
they don't exist at all.
They don't exist.
Well, so I'm going to get a little existential on you here. If they don't exist, then I don't know what I'm missing. Or are you saying they are shuttered today, but I knew they used to exist?
Yeah, they used to exist, and now Ravi's the reason. Callum Scott, you are the reason.
Found a genie, and that was the cost of being a professional athlete, was team sports ceased to exist. It's pretty selfish, but I would take the individual, being a professional athlete in an individual sport.
You jerk.
I know, I'm a jerk. But here's the thing. I really, really love tennis. I would like being a professional tennis player, I think would be
that's how I knew this question would appeal to you.
Incredible. And also, professional tennis players make bank. Like they make real good money. So do professional golfers, obviously, as well. I know.
And that's what appeals to me.
I would say you would go professional golf. Which one are you picking there? Are you picking team sports?
I'm keeping team sports. I'm keeping the people happy.
Yeah, I'm keeping me happy.
We're keeping all football fans, all baseball fans, all soccer, hockey, everything. I'm watching team sports, and I'm cool with the life I'm living right now.
I'm going professional sports. I'm gonna go win Wimbledon. Coming up next, we got more Hurrdat Hot Seat. And man, do I have a dumb one for you. That's next on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Want to tell you about our friends, our dear, dear friends at Warhorse Sportsbook. We are just a couple days away. You've got until February 1st to get qualified for the Warhorse Festival of Games. That's $100,000. You heard that right. That's 6 figures. $100,000 prop card challenge and the $20,000 grand prize drawing. Here's what you do. First and foremost, if you're not already, what you should be a Warhorse Rewards member, all right? Get that done first and foremost. Then all you've got to do, for every $50 sportsbook ticket that you have, you get entered an automatic entry into both the prop card challenge and the grand prize drawing. At that point, all you got to do, make your prop picks on that prop card challenge. That will come out on February 5th with the specific props for the big professional football championship on February 11th. You get 25 out of 25 right, you're staring dead eye at $100,000 on that prop card challenge. You get 24 out of 25, you just missed, but you still have a chance at that $20,000. Or you get 0 out of 25, which is probably what I'm going to do. You got still
positive thoughts.
Listen, I'm a realist. You still got a chance at that $20,000 grand prize drawing. You got any questions? You're a little confused on how to do it? Don't worry. WarhorseCasino.com has you covered. They will explain everything you need to know to get in to this incredible festival of games. That's WarhorseCasino.com. This is for the casino in Lincoln only, so make sure you go visit them in Lincoln for this festival of games. Warhorse Sportsbook, no bets, no glory. All right, back to the Hurrdat hot seat.
Back to you.
Back to me. So you were looking at Twitter over the break here, or over the last break.
That I was.
And you were looking and so what Twitter feed was it? Was it Pitching Ninja?
I'm going to scroll back up. It was Historic Vids.
Okay.
And it's History in Memes is what the page is called, but it's daily history lessons. And they showed a clip of Doc Ellis throwing a no-hitter And that was when he was under the effects of psychedelics during the game in 1970.
He was on acid. He was tripping on acid, and he very famously in his autobiography says he was on acid during his no-hitter. So I thought of this question, right? Because it's not the first or only time that a pitcher has thrown an incredible game after some substance abuse. Okay, not that we're encouraging that. Kids, be safe here. So Doc Ellis threw a no-hitter on acid. David Wells threw a perfect game, violently hungover. Which do you think is harder? Now, to my knowledge, neither of us have done acid.
That would be correct.
So that's an important note here. But both of us have been hungover.
Yeah, and I've had some bad hangovers.
I've had some doozies. I imagine this was a doozy for David Wells.
Probably should search. I was about to search side effects of acid on my computer, but it's my work computer. So I'm going to switch to
maybe
my phone.
Not while we're connected to the work Wi-Fi. Are you going to search LSD effects here? I believe there's some hallucinating involved.
I kind of want to get my bearings, knowing
which might be hard to do if you were on acid, is to get your bearings.
Yeah, that would probably be true. I wouldn't know, but it would probably be true.
So I think I have an answer here without knowing what it's like to be on acid.
Go for it.
I think it would be more miserable to throw a game hungover.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be easier to throw a game on acid, but I don't know. So give me some of the side effects here.
Okay, the effects of LSD: euphoria, well-being, perceptual changes, visual and auditory hallucinations,
like DB was having with his.
Yeah, exactly. Trouble with DB. No, not gonna say it.
The ding ding.
Confusion and trouble concentrating, headaches, nausea, irregular heartbeat, increased body temp, breathing quickly, vomiting.
So
facial flushes.
Here's my thought: is because part of the hardest part about throwing either a no-hitter or a perfect game is the pressure starts to mount as
that is true.
As you get closer, you're like, oh, I've got 18 straight outs, or oh, I'm in the 7th inning, nobody's gotten hit yet. Oh, we're in the bottom of the 8th here. I think, hot take here, I think the acid helped him not have to worry about the pressure of the no-hitter.
It's funny you say that. I did know somebody that used to pitch almost every game on marijuana.
Okay.
And he would always pitch his best games while he was high. And that was because he felt so calm on the mound.
Yeah.
He felt so in the zone, in his element. So based on that knowledge, I can kind of get down with what you're throwing down, because the way I look at it is it's so hard on you mentally to fight a hangover, especially if you have a stomach ache or you feel like you're going to throw up. And there's so many things that just make your body feel disgusting.
I believe this was in August too, so it was hot and miserable.
And
there's nothing worse.
I can't imagine that mental battle of trying to fight off a hangover. Meanwhile, if you are on acid, yes, you may be experiencing similar things, but are you really thinking about, hey, I'm about to vomit? Hey, I'm spinning, I'm dizzy. Or are you thinking about, hey, this is kind of fun. Like, oh, I'm just going to throw the ball into my catcher's glove right now. And, it's not like he forgot how to play baseball while being on acid.
Apparently.
He was in the zone, I guess. So I would say being hungover is a lot worse.
Now, there is a possibility that David Wells was so focused on fighting the hangover that he was not focused at all in the baseball game. And so that also alleviated him of the baseball pressure. But still,
maybe. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't think I would ever want to stand out there if I felt miserable.
So that's the thing. I couldn't be outside in August heat for 3 hours or whatever it took while hungover.
Well, and plus you're moving around. I mean, you're doing physical activity, so you're getting more dehydrated. I mean, you almost got to be sitting beside the water, the water there during the other innings just to get rehydrated.
Not ideal. Yeah. So I think we both agree not to do acid. Don't do it. Don't do drugs. But I think in that situation, I think being hungover would be harder.
That is correct.
I think it would be worse. All right. What's your next one?
All right. I got one for you.
I told you it was stupid.
Here's a thinker. If you were creating a new sports TV series similar to Ted Lasso, perhaps. You're a big Ted Lasso fan.
Yep.
I like Ted Lasso. Think of it like that's the series you're trying to recreate or create. What sport would be featured in your series, and who would be your star?
Ooh, that's tricky. That is really difficult. So I think I kind of want. My first instinct was baseball.
Okay,
because first there's a lot of unique characters on a baseball team. Relief pitchers in general are very strange human beings.
They are goofballs,
especially lefties for whatever reason.
I don't share the same experiences with lefties as you do.
I think, I don't know. I think it's a thing, but lefty relievers especially are a lot of times just giant weirdos. In my experience, they're good people, but they're strange. So I think you'd have some characters on a baseball team. I also think it'd be really easy to make it because basically what you're doing here is making a workplace comedy. That's generally what these types of shows are. And because of the nature of baseball, it's a little bit slower paced. You could have not only the interactions in the clubhouse, but you could have them in the dugout during games and stuff like that. And it's a long season, so there'd be a lot of things to explore there. I think baseball is a very fertile ground for a workplace comedy.
That's a good one. What about your star? Who is going to be whether it's like the manager, whether it's like the star player, who's going to star in your series?
Man, so that's really tough because if I'm going comedy here, I feel like Nick Offerman as my manager would be hilarious.
I like that.
I'm kind of just doing Parks and Rec with a baseball club, but I think having Ron Swanson be my manager would be really funny. I'm trying to think of somebody younger.
Very dry too.
Yes, yeah,
which would make him the perfect manager.
That's the thing, is I feel like he would nail that role of being a manager. Did he play a manager in something?
No, you're thinking Tom Hanks. That was A League of Their Own.
No, didn't Amazon do A League of Their Own? I think Nick Offerman might be the manager in the League in the Amazon series. I might be having like a weird fever dream here. But Nick Offerman as my manager would be, I think, ideal. If I'm doing a player, if I'm going,
oh my gosh,
is that right?
And Nick Offerman, the coach in Amazon's A League of Their Own reboot.
Well, so I guess I'm not the only one that thought he would make a good manager. That's really funny.
That is funny.
So I'll try and think of somebody. I think like an aging star would be kind of funny, sort of like the Roy Kent character. On Ted Lasso. I'm trying to think who would be. Ooh, that's a tough one. Do you have one?
So for me, I would actually base it off true events.
Okay.
It would be hockey.
Okay.
And it would be the Danbury Trashers.
Okay.
So do you remember that team?
No.
Dude, we're going to have to go into this at like 9:30.
Okay.
Okay. And my star would be Tom Holland.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I'm going with Tom Holland is because he's younger in show business, but the Danbury Trashers used to be a team that were owned by the mob, and like the mob boss gifted the team to his like 17-year-old son.
Incredible.
We'll go into the story.
Incredible.
It's an incredible story.
Coming up next, Mike Schaefer, Husker 24/7.
We will be back. be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio, covering Nebraska football and recruiting for 24/7 Sports. Here is Mike J. Schaefer.
Yeah, that's a grown-ass man right there.
Mike Schaefer.
I don't know. There could be bacon involved.
Mike Schaefer.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks, Brian Edwards, for me.
Here is Mike Schaefer.
Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. And for hour number 3, we're on KFOR in Lincoln. We are joined now by our friend from Husker 24/7, Mike Schaefer. Schaefer, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, guys?
What's up, Michael?
We are doing well on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. We've got Mike Schaefer. Schaefer, we've been talking a lot this morning about expectations versus reality in the Dylan Raiola as a true freshman starting quarterback discussion because it's late January, and what else are we going to talk about? But, Schaefer, if I told you that you were going to get 62% completion, 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 10 picks from Dylan Raiola, A, do you take it? And B, how many wins does that equate to in your head?
Well, I mean, I think that's a lot more touchdowns than they had. I don't even know how many total touchdowns Nebraska.
I'm not sure it was 22, if I'm being honest. I can look it up real quick.
just like doing the math in my head. So 22 times 6, and it's like, whoa, did they even score that many? And yes, they did. I know they did. But yeah, I mean, look, those are good numbers for. I mean, quite frankly, those are good numbers if it was Kyle McCord, you know. So that's sort of where Nebraska's quarterback picture has been, and certainly throwing the ball over the last decade has been an adventure. So if you can promise me those numbers, I think it'd be really good. I mean, I think the yardage might even be a little high. Like, I think they're going to throw quite a bit. And they obviously will want to run, but I think they're going to try to go downfield quite a bit too. So the yardage might be a little higher. The completion percentage because of that might be a tick lower. Interceptions could maybe be a little bit up. But yeah, if those are the baseline numbers, I mean, those are fantastic. And I think any Nebraska fan would be happy to take that. As for how many wins it leads to, I mean, assuming you're still getting some rushing production in there from everybody, I would think that would get you in that 7 to 8 win range, right? Like that seems positive for, and again, if you were promising me those numbers, I think my expectation would be at least 7 wins.
Schaefer, if I could give you either those numbers or a 1,200-yard rusher, which are you taking?
Ooh. That's not really fair because I've been pining for like a bell cow running back for a while. And now you're making me choose between competent quarterback play, actually exceedingly competent quarterback play.
Yeah, those would be pretty good numbers, right? Like those would be good quarterback numbers.
Yeah, I agree. Like crazy if I'm taking the 1,200-yard rusher.
I don't think it's crazy.
You didn't guarantee touchdowns there, but that makes me assume you're scoring at like let's say that leads to 14 touchdowns. Like that's pretty good. And then you chip in like 15 passing touchdowns and like it moves them down a little bit.
Oh, Schaefer, did we lose you?
I like the. Yeah, I'm driving, so I apologize.
Oh, you're good. You're okay. We got you back.
You're okay.
Yeah, so I think I would take the rusher because it would take the pressure off of Dylan Raiola immensely if you can give him somebody competent in that backfield to be able to lean on a little bit. I mean, I think that's the difficult part here is Nebraska is going to need a Herculean effort once again from a young quarterback to try to mask the deficiencies of the rest of the offense.
Now, Shay, along the same lines of the Dylan Raiola effect, I was thinking the other night, we've already seen DR do his thing and help bring over commitments out of the transfer portal. But how much do you realistically think we'll see him, or I guess how much do you realistically think we'll see him do when he's officially in uniform in terms of that so-called like recruiting tactic that we've kind of like labeled him to be? Like, is his work just done in the wins and losses column and that tells the story? Or is he actually going to be somewhat of what he is now whenever, this staff is trying to recruit more and more top athletes?
Well, the thing is, if the staff is doing its job, and they would certainly express this, I think, the same way, he's never going to play a game before they're trying to land the biggest fish in this recruiting class, right? Like, so he's going to be able to be a weapon for them in terms of recruiting throughout the spring and the summer. During these unofficial and official visits, there's going to be wide receivers that are going to be able to come in, watch Nebraska practice, watch summer workouts, whatever, and see this guy throw. And then, they can work off of the cachet that he has in the recruiting world to basically be like, okay, well, Nebraska needs help at wide receiver, or Nebraska needs a running back, or I'm a left tackle and I want to block for this guy. Like that, those conversations, all of that can all happen even before he ever takes a snap for Nebraska, just based on the way the recruiting cycle and the speed of all of this comes together. So he's going to be an asset in recruiting for sure this spring and this summer, even if he's not like as involved as he was for Georgia or as he was for Nebraska here at the beginning of January with Jamal Banks and Dowdell and Isaiah Nair. So I look for him to be a talking point for wide receivers, tight ends, like anybody on offense, really. I mean, I just think, and then we'll see if it extends over to defense. But I would expect that that's going to be a thing, especially because I'm not entirely convinced Nebraska is going to get a 2025 quarterback early in the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he might end up being sort of an effective peer recruiting quarterback once again, even though it's not his recruiting cycle.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. Schaefer, I'm going to go. I assume you don't have, the numbers of various true freshman quarterbacks memorized off the top of your head. But if I said, just based purely on vibes, which I know is dangerous, if I said the vibe of Dylan Raiola's freshman year will be the same as Bo Nix's freshman year at Auburn, your response would be what?
Well, I don't know how I ever feel about Auburn and Nebraska being in the same sentence, especially when we're talking vibes, because that usually means coaching buyouts. If I know anything about
immaculate vibes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what Bo Nix did. I just know everything he did at Auburn felt like a roller coaster. You got the best of the best, and you got some of the lowest of the lows, and in there. I feel like that was like a 7-5 team off the top of my head. I don't know.
His freshman year, they were a 9-win team.
Okay, well, there you go. So, I mean, certainly in terms of win-losses, like if that's, I think one of the more interesting things from just talking with the guys at our 24/7 Sports Network is it's really hard with true freshmen because there's the top-end guys don't play as much as you think they do. Like, if you look at last year's class, none of the true freshmen that were on the freshman All-American teams were like highly rated guys. Those guys all sat. They, because they end up at programs where there's a better quarterback in front of them, or there's an established quarterback, or what have you. So it is a little bit difficult. You kind of have to go to a Bo Nix, or you have to, you even have to look at Adrian Martinez in 2018, because there's just not as many of these true freshman starting quarterbacks as we maybe build in our minds. And that's what makes it difficult to sort of project exactly how Dylan Raiola is going to play in 2024. But, yeah, I mean, if you can tell me that it's going to look like that, even again, if it's 7 wins, there's no way I'm not taking it sight unseen. I mean, the health of this program, if they just win 7 games, is large. If they win 9 games next year, I mean, the jokes about off-season champs are going to swell into off-season guys.
Schaefer, we've been seeing a lot of moves made. Last week we talked about the big weekend Nebraska had. This past weekend, similar things took place. We're seeing this staff continue to be aggressive in the Miami area with moves in 2024 and now in 2025. But, I'm curious, is there an area of the country you think they need to hit harder than they are right now?
I don't know if I would say they need to hit it harder. They need to find more success in it. They certainly needed to hit it harder than the previous staffs. I think they've done that. But Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, that whole region, like there's at least 3 guys every year that are more than good enough to be scholarship players. There's often 7 guys, that are good enough to be on your roster. And Nebraska needs to get more players out of Kansas City. I mean, there's no reason that Mike Riley's staff really dropped the ball there. Scott Frost's staff never really picked it up and ran with it. And here we are now to Matt Rule, and you have Kansas is good at football. Kansas State is good at football. Missouri is good at football. Iowa State's good at football. Iowa's good at football. Michigan comes in and recruits there. Wisconsin comes in and recruits there. Oklahoma has made a living there. Like, it's difficult for me to understand how all of these teams that are good at what Nebraska wants to be good at are more than happy to go into Kansas City and get the high-end guys, the medium guys, the sort of underrated dark horse guys. And yet Nebraska is like, nah, we don't want to go 3.5 hours from our house to look for talent. I don't get it. And so I want them to make that an area of emphasis. There's guys down there, whether it's Andrew Babaloa, who's a 5-star offensive tackle, whether it is, his teammate Brock Heath, whether it's Jaden Woods, a Mill Valley 4-star edge. Like, there's just a lot of talent down there and in that area and in the surrounding communities. Like, we talk about how it's exploding in Omaha and Nebraska in terms of recruitable 5-star talent. It's doing that in other places in the Midwest that are right next door. Nebraska needs to be in a better position to take some of these guys. And I think they're working there, but they're not quite there yet. And maybe this can be sort of the start of it.
Schaefer, provide some added perspective here for me and some of our listeners, because I know you've been on the Kansas City train for a little while in terms of where you think Nebraska should make a bigger presence or make their presence feel known. You know, this staff is so good about like doing things the unconventional way. You know, maybe not just doing what everybody else is doing, but in this case, you provide a lot of good examples. In terms of the perspective I'm looking for, who are some names you've seen out of Kansas City become something other places?
That's sort of always the difficult part because I'm not right in front of a computer, so I can't even Google that as we're sitting here. But I know, like, I look at Iowa State. They have several guys from the Kansas City area that have been successful for them. Michigan has several as well. Wisconsin has several. I go back to kind of Kansas State. There was a guy, Elijah Lee. He played with the Davis twins at Blue Springs. This goes back to Bo Pelini. Like, this is a guy that absolutely there's no reason Nebraska didn't have on its roster. He wanted to go to Nebraska. They were sort of interested, but never moved on it. They needed an edge rusher. They went with a guy named DeAndre Wills, who lasted one day on campus before he transferred to Jackson State. And Elijah Lee is just sitting right there, and they never do anything with him. And he ends up in the NFL. And, you know, there's other guys of that exact example. I'm blanking. I'm failing you really bad right now. But if you give me a little bit, I would be more than happy to tweet at you a list of players
Hit
that
me
have
with
come out
them.
of Kansas. Yeah, and that, you know, Nebraska absolutely could have been in better position with had they recruited the area better and had they continued to recruit it. Because some of it is, you know, there's guys that, you know, they didn't really have a chance with that they would have had a better chance with had they continued to recruit that area hard instead of sort of popping in and you know, a little bit here, a little bit there, but never making it an emphasis. I talked with Bill Bush about this the other day, and he basically was like, yeah, when I went back into Kansas City, there was coaches that were like, you know, it's nice instead of just getting Scott Frost would come in for one day, hit 3 schools, take some photos of coaches, Nebraska would never be back there again. Like, you just can't have that. Like, it's in your backyard. It does not make any sense to me for that not to be an aggressively pursued area. And I think the staff will do that. Rob Dvorak is going to be a big part of that. And their connections, I think, down there are still really strong. There's a lot of Nebraska fans in the Kansas City, Missouri area. And I think it's important to kind of play off of that.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7. Schaefer, as we kind of keep going through these, you know, junior day weekends, and, you know, obviously last weekend was a big junior day type event. You've got another one. You know, I believe you have another one coming up this weekend with Nebraska. Who are some of the names that we should start keeping an eye on, whether it's locally, whether it's nationally? Like, who are some people that you're most interested in that have shown interest in Nebraska in these upcoming classes?
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy down in Miami. I think I've talked about him before, Cortez Mills.
Mm-hmm.
He basically the sort of wide receiver that I think Dylan Raiola can help Nebraska with. He's also friends with Ja'Cory Barney and Willis McGahee and those guys. He's also being recruited by LSU, Georgia, Clemson, and literally everybody under the sun, so that doesn't make it easy. But I think Nebraska has some pull there with him. You know, and then right here locally, I think if they can get Andrew Babaloa, I mentioned him, back up again. He's visited a couple times. You have Christian Jones right in Omaha. That's someone that Nebraska, I think, is going to get in their class, but it might take a lot of time and a lot of effort to make that happen. A name in Omaha that I feel like maybe gets overlooked a little bit. He was at Elkhorn North the last couple years. His brother's at Kansas State, and he's going to be at Millard South next year. Chase Lofton is a guy that falls in that Power 5 tight end category where Nebraska seems to produce
3 to 4 of those guys every year now, and he's probably the best of them in this 2025 cycle right here in Nebraska. So that's another local kid to really keep an eye on. Pierce Mooberry will be part of Nebraska's class. It's just a matter of when it happens. There's just a lot, that it can be going on here locally. I mean, and then nationally, we'll sort of see how it plays out, where they kind of put their attention. It's interesting. I haven't seen as many names in Texas linked with Nebraska as what it was at this time last year, but I think that had a chance to certainly grow. We'll see if they're able to build off of some Pauley connections. There's a couple kids out in Hawaii that I think are going to be taking official visits to Nebraska after Preston Taumua ended up in this class, and they have connections to the Raiola family as well. So, I mean, they're going to be a national recruiting operation as always. And it's interesting because I don't feel like, last year it felt like it was going to be a very Texas-heavy thing. I don't know that I feel the same way this year, but it might just be because some of those names haven't developed to the point where we knew them as early as we did last year.
Shafe, I want to take a look at the Big Ten as a whole now and talk about a recent hire at Iowa. What are your thoughts on them getting Tim Lester?
I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I think I, like everyone else, laughed at the Roger Sherman tweet about, multiple months looking for an offensive coordinator and hiring a guy whose last offense he oversaw was like 128th in the S and whatever plus, I don't know what it is. But, look, it doesn't mean anything to me because it's Kirk Ferentz' program. Like, it's going to be the same whether it was his kid running it, whether it was someone else running it. Like, they're going to be methodical. They're going to play off of play action. They're going to get their tight ends involved. They're going to try to have a big offensive line up front. They're going to be deceptively bad at rushing the football, despite the fact they have this big offensive line up front. And that's what they're going to be. They're going to play through their defense, and that's who they are. And it didn't matter who they hired as their offensive coordinator. So whether it was Tim Lester or Paul Chryst or Scott Frost, I felt like it was going to be the same team no matter what.
Shafe, I want to circle back to the true freshman thing we were talking about a little bit earlier, because I had a chance to look at some things while we were talking here. And because my guy Riley on Twitter put together a terrific spreadsheet for me of the top 3 quarterbacks in each class and how they performed as true freshmen. And as you mentioned, a lot of the big name guys don't play that much as true freshmen because they're going to places that already have 5-star quarterbacks, right? So what if I told you that of the guys, and I believe there is 7 in the last 10 years, just out of those top 3 groups every year, 7 of those guys are what I would call full-time starters. You're talking starting double-digit games for their teams. Only one of those teams ended up with fewer than 7 wins.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, genuinely a product of those teams' strength to begin with. Because, again, if we're looking at that, Nebraska is probably one of how many teams that is coming in with a losing record of the year prior, let alone the previous 7, to then land one of these quarterbacks. So, I mean, again, I would be surprised if Nebraska doesn't win 7 games next year because I think the schedule sets up. I think the roster sets up. But obviously, he's got to be able to stay healthy because if it's not Dylan Raiola, then you have a real interesting conversation about how Nebraska plays. And they don't have a backup quarterback that's similar to what we expect the expected starter to be. But if he's healthy and if he's able to be a full-time starter, I mean, my expectation is for Nebraska to be successful and for him to be successful. They've made this bet that they can win games. They didn't make this bet because they thought, in 2 years we might be really good. They know they need to win some games right away next year, and they feel comfortable enough to allow a true freshman to have that opportunity. So I feel like they see it in the same way. And it may not be perfect. And it's, there's going to be a lot of growing pains, I'm sure, throughout. But they're betting on it. And they apparently are confident enough that there's really no other true option out there, at least not externally.
Shafe, I have some just random college football questions popping into my head now as I'm thinking about coaches after asking you about Tim Lester. And now I'm thinking about Sharon Moore up at Michigan. Do you think he'll be able to keep the Wolverines in their powerhouse stage, or do you expect setbacks early on?
I'm really curious how that one goes. I mean, I think, like, you can't talk about this year's Michigan team without at least mentioning the cheating scandal.
Mm-hmm.
You can't talk about the cheating scandal without at least mentioning that it basically felt born out of the fact that in 2020, Jim Harbaugh had his worst year with Michigan, and obviously COVID and everything else. And it's hard to know how much of that was that and everything else. But, I mean, their rise as a program coincides with scandals. So if Sharon Moore comes in and everything's squeaky clean and you lose this sort of extended run of seniors that help pull you over the top, and you're starting fresh at quarterback, and you don't have Blake Corum, and you don't have sort of Jim Harbaugh's touch on a program. I mean, David Shaw kept it sustained for a little while at Stanford, and then it bellied up. I anticipate similar, with Michigan. I don't think it'll go full Stanford, but I think it's going to be hard for them to stay at the level they've been the last 3 years. And I think it's going to be hard for Sharon Moore to basically be Jim Harbaugh right off the bat. I mean, there's a lot of people that are excited about him, but I just don't know. I don't know if he could just do something.
That's Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. Schaefer, we appreciate your time as always and indulging us kind of going all over the place with you this morning. We will talk to you again soon.
See you guys.
Hey, thanks, Schaefer. That's Mike J. Schaefer from Husker 24/7 Sports on the War Horse Sportsbook Hotline. Coming up next, we're going to talk more about the mob.
The Danbury Trashers.
The hockey team owned
and
by
I'm
the
going to give
mob.
you some names that I think should be casted in my TV series.
Let's do it. Coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. I want to tell you about our friends at Pratt Dental in North Platte, Nebraska. Dr. Pratt was the first dentist in Nebraska to be certified in the BioClear method and modern smile design, which can correct many aesthetic dilemmas in a permanent and less invasive manner than traditional treatments such as crowns. Less invasive gives you many benefits, such as less time, less waiting, and fewer appointments because you can get multiple restorations done in the same day. Go check out Pratt Dental at prattdental.com. That's Pratt with 2 T's, dental.com/BioClear-dental-treatment, or just go to prattdental.com, click on their services, and you'll see the BioClear treatment there, or you can give them a call, 308-221-2800. That is Pratt Dental in North Platte, Nebraska, creating healthy smiles. Some things that make us smile are fictional sports television shows that we created off the top of our heads.
Random hypotheticals. Although mine is based off of a Netflix documentary.
So I want to as I've had some time to think about it, I want to re-pitch you my baseball series. Okay. And then we will get to your mob-owned hockey team, which I am all in on, by the way. So here's my new series. Okay. It's the Savannah Bananas.
Such a good one.
But one player on the team is an ex-major leaguer trying to get back to the show, and this is the last team that would have him, was the Savannah Bananas.
Okay. Who is that player?
Ryan Gosling. I think he does a really good job, and Ken's why. I think he does a really good job of like playing like he's serious in a comedic way. Like the character of Ken like is sort of serious the whole time, but it's a joke. I think that's the perfect type of acting for this major leaguer, ex-major leaguer. Like he had a cup of coffee, like just had like a moment, and he's just desperately trying to get back to the league. The Savannah Bananas are the only team that would sign him and offered him a contract. And he didn't know that they were a joke baseball team when he signed the contract. He's like, independent ball, I can make my way back. And then he gets there and he's like, what the hell is going on? What am I doing? What is banana ball?
The real story of Archie Graham, huh?
That is my new baseball pitch for you.
All right. That would be a great TV series.
Absolutely.
The Savannah Bananas. That's a good one. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about the Danbury Trashers.
This is fascinating.
And so, when you go home and you watch the documentary, it's called Untold Crimes and Penalties. And so the Trashers were a team. So the guy that like ran like this mob essentially was Jimmy Galante. Okay. He
great mob name, by the way.
He like ran a garbage truck company, which is why they named themselves the Trashers.
Okay.
And so that's like kind of like what got him in trouble at the end of the day by
In Sanitation, also a great mob cover.
Right.
Tony Soprano would be proud.
Exactly. and you know what? I think the whole thing is based off of Tony Soprano.
Okay.
And so he buys this team for his kid who's 17, who wasn't expecting to be the GM and president and whatnot, but they were trying to like revamp like hockey, right? Maybe just do something like fun and also kind of give them extra cover on other things. So
they probably wanted a place to launder money.
Yeah, I mean, let's the hockey team was so unique and so successful because it was different. They became the bad boys of hockey.
Okay.
They would like nonstop brawl on the ice, which was highly frowned upon in this league.
Yeah.
And they had talking tos from like league commissioners, but they wouldn't change their ways. And they also were I keep wanting to say program because we talk so much college. They were also a franchise organization that would pay their players a lot more than like the league minimum.
Sure.
Under the table.
Sure.
So like they would get like really solid players and also like some of the toughest players around. And they just for like 2 or 3 seasons, I can't remember how long the team actually lasted. They were like the most well-known like minor league team around like ever.
Yeah.
And it's because of they just did it differently. Now, you know, Galente was eventually sentenced to like 87 months in prison for, you know,
mob stuff.
Yeah, whatever. But the reason I love this story a ton too is because like all my life, I'm like, man, I would love to own a team.
Yeah.
And like, you know, even you've said before, like if I could buy a team someday, like I would buy stake in X, Y, and Z team. So like this kid like owned a team at 17.
Yeah.
And he's somebody that like only watched the Mighty Ducks and
that would be me. If I was running a hockey franchise, it would be based entirely
like Emilio Estevez is your coach.
It would be based entirely on the Mighty Ducks and on Miracle.
Right. And so like those he thinks like a kid, he acts like a kid, and like that's how the team was kind of run. It was run without like any sort of guidance or control. And I was thinking about a good cast of characters for this, and I'm not going to go like way deep into like building a team and whatnot, but I said Tom Holland would be my
good owner,
AJ Galente, because I feel like he's like
he could play high school.
He could play high school.
Yeah.
He also it's not uncommon for him to like develop an accent for something, so like he could really get that New York accent and be good at it. But I think like a great father figure for him. And at first I'm thinking like Robert De Niro or there was a guy in A Bronx Tale that like was the bad guy. It was Chaz Palminteri or something.
Yeah.
Palminteri.
I love that actor.
Is that how you pronounce his name?
Chaz.
Yeah. I meant his last name. I got Chaz.
Yeah. He's also in this. He plays a lot of mob roles.
So I thought about like, man, that would be perfect for Jimmy, but they're so old now.
I'll say it's
like
a little
71, 80. But I think what would be perfect for Jimmy Galente is somebody like sarcastic, but could also be serious, and also somebody with a previous relationship with
Robert
Tom
Downey
Holland.
Jr.
Robert Downey Jr.
Yep, that's the first person I thought of.
Perfect to play like
Jimmy,
the man.
Yeah, Jimmy. Oh, that's
the head boss.
It's so funny because as soon as you said Tom Holland, I was like, oh, Robert Downey Jr. should play his dad because the Spider-Man Iron Man thing, like it was kind
of, so it kind of works
perfect.
There. And so he also, because of his his affinity for the Mighty Ducks, I think having a Mighty Ducks character is perfect for the film. So you have to welcome in Eldon Henson, who was the first enforcer of the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
Not like the team up Bash Brothers, but he was like the first guy that was like, hey, I don't want to get in this dude's way.
He was he's
Fulton Reed, I believe was his name.
Yep. He was also in he's in the Hunger Games. He's one of the
he was
one of the mute guys in the Hunger Games.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And then I would also grab actual former NHL enforcers to be in this show.
Nice.
Like not like because they're not big enough names themselves to like be
super
too prestigious.
You're not getting like
role
Sidney
like
Crosby
this.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I could get Cam Jansen, who used to fight for the Blues all the time and no one really knows his name. Or I could maybe welcome in Tony Twist. Everybody remembers his fights.
And they could be your action directors. You know, they would
a little bit, but since they played the sport, they know like
they would
idea
direct
of the film.
Yeah.
And so like I think like that's kind of the crew that I would form for this TV show. I know that it's like people are out there are probably like, well, they already made like this doc, and like I get that, but think about like what that would look like as Ted Lasso.
Oh,
like the Danbury Trashers. I always want to say Dansbury, but
Like I always want to say Thrashers because Atlanta.
Because of the Atlanta Thrashers. And then we went down the rabbit hole of who the Thrashers used to be.
And who they are now.
And who the Jets used to be or who they are now and who the Hurricanes used to be. That's for a different
hockey
day.
franchise moves are an entire rabbit hole.
Dude, you can go a ton of different directions. But I don't think I need like heavy Italian former like big name mob guys.
No.
I just need I can create that with this random crew, and because it's the whole series is a joke. Like the fact that this kid owned a team at 17 is a complete joke.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I make my cast a joke?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what I'm going with.
There you go.
You got to go home and watch it. I may go home and watch it again.
No, I'm going to. That's fascinating because I love mob stories. I'm a big like Godfather, Goodfellas, Sopranos. Like so that's in my wheelhouse, and I love a good sports documentary. So that's perfect.
Robert Downey Jr.
No, I know. Like as soon as you said it, I was
So
like, man,
funny.
that's got to be his dad.
You know, like the sarcasm that can be shown, when like FBI rolls in the door and then Downey's got his like feet kicked up on the table and he's just flipping through a magazine,
Got the
acting
cigar.
all innocent.
Got the mob cigar. That's funny. Let's pitch these shows to like Amazon or Apple TV or some streaming service that has too much money. Let's see what we can do here.
I wonder how much money it would cost to like get those names. Like Robert Downey and Tom Holland would be so expensive.
Yes.
But like the other names are probably just like,
I'll say
I could probably pay you what they actually paid you, like if you were to play for the Trashers.
Say you could play him. You could pay him minor league hockey rates. You'd be good to go. That's where you save your budget. Coming up next, we want to talk a little bit of Alabama football. They obviously have gone through a huge transition lately. We're going to talk to Ryan Fowler. He is the host of The Game on 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa. We're going to get a pulse on Alabama Nation here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Touchdown, Alabama. A 68-yard play. That's what you were looking for.
Wrapping up the show here on a Tuesday on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are joined now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline by Ryan Fowler. He is the host of The Game on 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa, Tuscaloosa's longest-running sports talk show. Ryan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. Talking about Alabama football up in Nebraska. Thank you again.
Well, so it helps because I gotta tell myself here a little bit. I'm obsessed with Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah, we didn't have a choice today.
I am obsessed with Kalen DeBoer. So I've been very curious. He didn't have the history in the South that a lot of coaches that end up coaching in the SEC are, especially at the high-profile programs. I'm curious with the fans in and around your area, if DeBoer was the guy they wanted or if there was another name on that list that they had ahead of him.
You know, I've tried to find out how many people they've interviewed. I know it was only at least two people at least. I'm still trying to think because they went to Houston, but I don't know who they interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was Sark that met them down there. I don't know if it was another coach. You know, you think obviously D'Amico Ryans could have been a possibility there with the Houston, Texas, with his ties back to Alabama. Or maybe it was just some other coach and that was just trying to throw us off. Because I do know that the plane with Greg Byrne and one of the individuals that was part of the hiring process, both of them went to Houston. Mm-hmm. And then they went to Washington and interviewed Kalen DeBoer. And so I don't know if they got a negative tone in Houston, but I don't know it. I know he was, and I did ask Greg Byrne this in the press conference, was he the number one target? And he said, well, you never box yourself in to saying he's the number one target because, if he says no, then you have to go back and say, he said he was high on the list. And so I kind of have to take that. But the more I learn about Kalen DeBoer, the more I begin to get excited about this coaching staff. This coaching staff is going to be better than what Nick Saban put on the field this past year, top to bottom. Not Nick Saban, it was top heavy, right?
Sure.
1 through 11, 10 assistant coaches, the head coach. And I think this Kalen DeBoer staff is going to be better.
Ryan, what's been the fan reaction to Kalen DeBoer? You've said you've gotten more excited the more you've gotten to know about him and the more you've seen the coaching staff. How's the Alabama faithful reacted to the hiring of Kalen DeBoer and the staff he's putting together?
Yeah, I think very, very similar. I think, and we've tried to do that here in Tuscaloosa. We've tried to feature, former coaches that coach with him. We haven't featured a player, but we featured people like Warren Moon from UW that kind of helped us understand the offense that he's going to bring. And then when you begin to look at, like Dave Bartu is another college football matrix, CFB analytical, and he's all about coaches, and he grades out coaches. And he said, this is trending to be the best coaching staff, top to bottom, in college football. And, you hear stuff like that. That's pretty crazy compared to where they were at. And that was the slot of Nick Saban. He no longer could hire those top-tier coaches. And, that was one of his downfalls towards the back end of his career.
Ryan, a quick follow-up to that point about the overall fan response. Is there any hesitancy to believe Bama can't stay great? Are they worried Washington football won't work in Alabama?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess you could always say, but there was no home run out there that was just automatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy's not going to fail. I mean, I remember when Nick Saban was hired here, there was doubts around him.
Mm-hmm.
So, you look at Kalen DeBoer, certainly an outsider, that there are going to be doubts, right? I mean, he's not from the Saban tree. He's not, a former Alabama guy. So, yeah, there's going to be doubts. But as far as they're not any different than what it was when Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator or things like that. I mean, so Alabama fans, as you guys know about college football, they kind of take it serious. And, they put it under a microscope and they try to determine, hey, is this the right way? Is this the right way? And, they second guess everything, whether it's the play call and, 4th down and 1 or if it's the coaching staff. But I think Alabama fans overall, though, if you gave them a 0 to 10, the excitement level, it's probably about an 8.5. I mean, they believe
high.
that this thing is going to continue. Well, I mean, think about Les Miles. If Les Miles can take a small term, right, 2000 to 2004, Nick Saban left, at LSU. There was a foundation there that Les Miles rode it to a national title and played for another. Well, I think Kalen DeBoer is much better than Les Miles as a head coach. I mean, I don't think it's comparable. I know Les Miles has got the championship, so if Kalen DeBoer can ride this system, the foundation that Nick Saban has built over 17 years, I think that's probably why he's excited to follow, the legend.
We're talking with Ryan Fowler. He is the host of The Game on 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa. Ryan, you mentioned following the legend. Obviously, that is a really tough position to take over. We know a little bit about that here in Nebraska, and winning at a high level isn't even always enough when you're following a legend like that. Obviously, the expectations in Alabama are always going to be college football playoff and national titles. But how much runway do you think Kalen DeBoer has in order to meet those expectations? Or like you said, because of the foundation, is it expected to basically hit those marks right away?
Well, that's a question to be determined. Because, see, I was even having the debate before Nick Saban retired following the Michigan game that Alabama fans need to almost rebalance their expectations. To think about college football, it's going to become a lot harder, right? You've got the playoffs. You've got the parity in college football. Your transfer portal has really hurt the depth of your football team. So when I was looking at it, I thought, man, we've got to readjust the expectations. They cannot always be national title, national title, national title.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we were already having that prior to Nick Saban, hanging up the headsets, that we were already here at this debate. And I think we must have that debate because college football is going to become it's going to become a challenge to win it. So even what Georgia did, the back-to-back, that now in college football, the system is designed, in my eyes, against those type of things.
Ryan, you mentioned the transfer portal, and we've seen players stay, we've seen players dip. What makes you ultimately sit up in your chair about some of the decisions made there? Like, what's kind of been the most unexpected move, good or bad, that has your full attention?
I don't. Maybe I'm not following your question. Repeat it if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
So I guess the idea of the question is based on players that have stayed and players that have dipped. sort of kind of the response from those players, whether it was to leave or whether to stay, what's kind of like stuck out to you that has you thinking, hey, man, I got to sit up in my chair and like really like pay full attention to what either this person is saying or the action that was made?
Yeah, we really haven't spoke to any of the players as far as when they leave. We're not given a lot of access here.
No, I guess not even just that, not like speaking to the players directly, but what you've read, what you've heard. Like, Jalen Milroe comes out and talks about like how the message has been reciprocated and the transition seems like it's going well with DeBoer. Like that to me makes me sit up in my chair and think, wow, okay, that going from Saban to DeBoer and having the quarterback and potentially a Heisman say that is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think that's where, there's a lot of players that have been locked in, a lot of offensive linemen. And I understand why a lot of the guys left. Like Caleb Downs, okay, take him for an example. He left Alabama and went to Ohio State. I've read some of the rumblings as far as the amount of money that he got. I can't blame the kid, right? I can't blame him for doing that. But it's almost thinking about, why wouldn't he have stayed here for one spring? Go through the system. Heck, he may like Kalen DeBoer more than he did Nick Saban. We don't know. You think about, the players that departed, it was almost like it was the easy way to do it. And this is something that we're going to have to take a look in college football. But as far as the players that have stayed, I know Tyler Booker had some comments. We haven't had any media availability, but they have been on Twitter, social networks. And, I think Malachi Moore came out with something the other day and said, if they're not wearing crimson, screw them or something like that. and so I'm cleaning that up for radio. But,
appreciate that.
Yeah. So we've heard from things like that, but we haven't really had any media availability. But I will tell you that the Senior Bowl is going on right now, and you'll have 3 Alabama guys there. You may get some, little droppings out of that particular, press availability down in Mobile.
That's Ryan Fowler. He is the host of The Game on 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us, giving us a little insight into the early days of the Kalen DeBoer era in Alabama, and maybe we'll catch up with you again soon.
Hey, no doubt. Anytime we can expand that Kalen DeBoer fan base, it's always good. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. That's Ryan Fowler.
You're welcome.
Host of The Game on 100.9 The Tide in Tuscaloosa. Listen, I'm driving the Kalen DeBoer bandwagon. I've been on that one for a while. I'm glad to hear that it seems that the reception for him is going well, because I was a little concerned that he'd get a little bit of that outsider treatment at Alabama. But
Probably more about the fans than the players.
Absolutely. That's all we have for today. We will be back tomorrow here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.